When I was doing matric, I knew that I wasn't the smartest kid in the class because, I never really got into the top of the class. I never got any, academic badges. But also, I was very shy. I'm an introvert, and therefore, I never got into leadership positions like being a member of the SRC or anything like that. I never actually got an opportunity to do that. But I learned one thing when I was at high school, that if I worked just a little bit harder than the next person, in spite of the fact that I may not have necessarily been the smartest person in the room, I could actually do better. And each time I tried it, I just put in a few more hours than what the next people or the average people were putting in. I could be fine. I could actually do better than the smartest person in the class. And that has become my mantra even today. So, I work typically much longer hours than the average person because I just believe I can cover a lot more ground by just putting a little bit more effort, a little bit more hours than the next person, and I can, get by and actually do well whilst doing this. And starting a business, you learn a whole lot of things about self-management. In other words, if I'm going to manage a whole group of people, the first thing I must do is to manage myself. What does that mean? It means I must be conscious of the strengths that I have. I must be quite aware of what I can do. I must be aware of the downsides or the negatives that I have to deal with as a person. And that way, if I can manage myself, then it's much easier to manage a company. It's much easier to manage a team or a group of people. And the second thing was about leadership. Because, as I say, I had never at a school level or even at university been exposed to leadership. But I learned a couple of things as I was starting my business. And also just out of sheer determination to improve the lot of others, to being empathetic to the fact that, there must have been a whole lot of kids that were much smarter than us or than me that could go on to become CAs, only if they had an opportunity. And therefore, a few of us came together and we created the Association of Black Accountants at the time, ABASA. And just playing that advocacy role, talking to the profession, to the accounting profession, fighting with the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants or the Public Auditors Board at the time, exposed me to some of the capabilities that I didn't even know I had. So that's one of the things as people that we've got to do, that, if you take yourself out of the comfort zone, you do things that you may not have done before, suddenly you discover a whole lot of things about yourself in trying to help others. So that's why, for instance, I suddenly discovered that I could speak in a meeting and people could listen. I could, address a group of people which I'd never done before. I'd never had that opportunity before. And I discovered that, in fact, I did have some leadership capabilities. But there is also a number of choices that we are given as a people. So, for instance, I made a choice that I wanted to be a leader. I wanted to establish ABASA in KwaZulu-Natal. I consciously took that decision. So there's something about self-leadership where you have to make certain decisions and certain choices for yourself, whether it's starting a new business or it's deciding to take yourself out of a comfort zone or doing things that you may not have done before, and suddenly you discover some of the strengths that you have as a person. The first CEO position which I had was, establishing my company. So I actually appointed myself as a CEO. So nobody actually did it for me. So, and that's why I guess, I was trialing ideas and you don't know much about managing people. Yes, I'd been a CFO in an established company where I was employed, which was part of, the Sizwe Smith Sugar Group at the time, which is now Ilovo Sugar. So I'd had some experience or even some training, how to manage people, how to lead people and that kind of thing. So, but, the real practice came when I started the firm. And we grew the firm and we started to merge with others. We created a much bigger firm. And I didn't appoint myself to be the national managing partner of Sizwe Nxasana, but I was chosen by the other partners because they saw something, in me in terms of leadership. And just, growing a company, I started to understand a lot more about how you deal with people. because, we're growing the firm. We had 7 offices in the country. We're employing more than 400 professionals in the firm, and a lot of things were going well. We're opening offices in different parts of recruiting people, and I was directly involved in recruiting a whole lot of people that we brought into the firm in the early years, because I started to understand the importance of recruiting the right people, the smartest people, having the people that were smarter than ours, would enable the firm to grow, would enable us as a business to navigate any challenge, any problem that we faced. And I've used that even today, that, I believe it is absolutely critical for us as leaders to surround ourselves, not with people who agree with us all the time, but with people who bring a different set of skills, who disagree, or who challenge us, who come up with ideas, who solve problems. And that way you are able to grow businesses. And after a while, I just decided, well, yes, I've done this to establish the firm. It was growing, it was doing well. And I get to a point, I guess, where I want new challenges. And, a few years into the firm, I actually told my family that at some point when I turned 40, that was the target, by which time I would obviously have been in the firm in Sizwe and Company or Nkonki Sizwe Nxasana for about 10 years in total, that I was going to go and do something else. And as indeed it happened, I reached 40, and I resigned from the firm even before I knew exactly what I was going to do next, which was quite a silly and stupid thing to do. But, that way I put myself in an uncomfortable position where to go and find something to do, which was a completely different area from what I'd become accustomed to. And I think it's important for us as people to do that. I always believe there are 2 kinds of people. There are people who are happy, with what they know, and each time they get into the crossroads in their lives, they always settle for, the tried and tested, the known. I'm the kind of people who belong to the other camp, that, when I get to any crossroads, I believe in putting myself in a challenging position where I'm going to go and try things that I haven't done before. It's scary. You feel it in your stomach. You lay awake at night. You're thinking, what does this mean and how is it going to work? But for me, it's been tremendously fulfilling to go and learn new things. So I remember, eventually I found a position which was advertised in the Sunday Times in the career section, where Telecom was looking for a CEO, and applied, and there were tons of us who applied for that job. The rest is history. So I did manage to get that CEO position at Telecom. I didn't know much about telecoms other than being a user of telecommunication services at the time. But, I took it upon myself that I was going to get my arms around this beast called telecommunication. So spent a lot of time, hours, days, weeks, months, learning and getting to the guts of the telecommunications industry, which was an absolute inspirational experience for me, because, here I was, having been trained as an accountant and auditor, I was learning a lot about telecommunications and how that business operates. And it was a wonderful experience, being part of the journey at Telecom, because, we were a company that was touching the lives of every single South African. And we're a company that was on a journey, the number of things that we had to do. The company got listed both on the JSE as well as in the New York Stock Exchange, which was an absolute, pleasure for me to be part of that journey, to be part of the team and part of the experience. I think it is important for us as leaders in any position to be humble about what we bring to the party, to understand that we are as good and as successful as the team around us is successful, but also that we don't know it all. We can't, especially in a large company the size of Telecom. When I got to Telecom, the company had 62,000 people. We had operations all over the country and so on. So there's no way you're going to know it all. However, it is important for you to at least understand how that business works. So I spent many hours going to yards where you have technicians, sitting down with just ordinary technicians and people, understanding in detail what they do. When they wake up in the morning, when a person takes that van, which you may see at the street corner, what do they really do? They may do a connection, they may repair a fault, but what does it mean? How do they do it? And going to and understanding the terminology and the jargon. There's a whole amount of jargon and terminology in telecommunications. So I had to understand exactly what it means. You go and see technical areas and understand the equipment, that is used and so on, so that you can ask the right kind of questions when you're sitting there as a leader. So you allow yourself to be led, but you must also understand that you have a limited time to actually know it. And at some point, people are going to be looking at you to provide some guidance and some leadership. But for me, I've always also believed that the team is really important, because if we have a great team together that is empowered, that is essentially listened to, you're more likely to get a lot more solutions out of that to deal with any situation, as opposed to an environment where people feel disempowered. My style is essentially to make sure that people are empowered, because if you start off by recruiting the right people, and you have the right people on the bus, you can't bring the right people who are smart, especially those that are smarter than you, and then you disempower them. It doesn't work. But if you get the right people on board and they are empowered, and you work together in mapping the direction, strategic direction, or even operational tactics that you may use in a business and so on, you always get the right answer, more often than not. And also, you understand that you're going to make mistakes, because typically in any environment where you're driving the culture of innovation, which is also linked with the culture of empowerment, you have to accept that your risk appetite for mistakes must be high. You must be a lot more tolerant for mistakes that people are going to make, because if they're trying new things, as long as they had all the information or whatever information they had, and they tried to do something, the mistakes were typical mistakes, where someone wasn't doing something silly, wasn't deliberate, or maybe malicious. If mistakes have happened, they happen. And the key issue is, how do you learn from those mistakes? Because I often believe, as it's always said, that we as people learn a hell of a lot from mistakes than we do from just continuous success. So I've had many failures in my own life, but I look at those things as lessons that you learn, that you use for avoiding mistakes, for growing as a person, for coming up with a whole battery of solutions to any problem that you may come across. But it also allows you to try new ideas, to be innovative, and to solve problems. So I really believe culture, if you put two companies side by side, and this one company has a great culture that empowers people, that has great people, that is problem solving, maybe not the greatest of strategy, and on the other side you have a company that has a great strategy, but the culture is not that great, guess which company wins all the time? It's a company that has great people, that has a great culture, wins all the time. What do companies exist for? Companies exist to provide goods or services to customers. And in any environment where you are providing goods and services to customers, it is important to understand the needs of customers, and sometimes to anticipate the needs of customers, and to create, in certain cases, needs that customers may not even realize they have. So if you look at some of the companies, especially in the social media space or the technology space, that have come up in the last couple of years, it is quite amazing that some of the needs we may not even have realized. We need, things like Facebook or Twitter or, any of these technology companies, goods or services. The important thing here is to understand, human nature and how people react and how people live. And therefore, if you are able to just solve the problems of the country, if you just take the African continent as an example, we have many issues, from the basic needs that we have as a people, from housing and food, electricity, communications, and so on. We haven't solved a ton of problems, in the continent, but those problems present business opportunities for us. Whether it is manufacturing basic goods or it is finding solutions to the problems that we have, including the basic needs, we can create new businesses that go on to become global businesses. It is quite possible. And we have a couple of examples of that, of companies that come from the African continent that have created something which goes on to become, global products. We just look at, for instance, the mobile payment space as an example. Because of the paucity of physical infrastructure of branches, you have a whole lot of companies that have gone into the mobile payment space, solving the problems of people's access to financial services. And that has become a global product that is available anywhere in the world. But the lessons that have been learned and exported from Africa are quite interesting. The innovation culture is something that has taken years to embed in the culture of First Rand. And it talks to some of the things that I've touched on earlier, which talk about, make sure that you recruit the best talent you can find, the smartest people, listen to young people, empower young people as well, but also, have a much higher tolerance for mistakes, for people who are going to try new things. And, you have a whole ton of things at First Rand that don't succeed, or products that we create that don't actually take off. But those few that do, go on to change and reshape the world. And some of them really, are about listening to the young people. For instance, if you look at services such as the cardless services, every bank in the world today has cardless services where you go in and maybe you want to withdraw money, you don't have a bank card with you, you can use your cell phone number to access your bank account using cardless services platform. Some of those things we did before most of the banks, in fact, banks did in the world. And that idea came from a graduate student, who said, for them as young people, they won't want to carry wallets with them all the time, but they always have their cell phones with them. And therefore, why can't we develop a solution where you go and withdraw money from an ATM without having a bank card? And we became one of the first banks in the world to actually offer that cardless services where you're able to withdraw money from an ATM. So it's listening to young people, is having the best people, is empowering people, is having people understand and believe that they have a safe environment, a safe space where they can try new things. And if they make mistakes, they're not going to be fired. But if they made, obviously, silly mistakes and, they didn't think properly about what they were doing, or they were malicious in their approach, of course, their careers may be limited in terms of, their progression within the group. I've been very fortunate at First Rand that in the kind of culture that we have, we're part of a team. Yes, of course, I happen to be a leader of the team, but we sit together and we make a whole lot of, decisions as a partnership. So, for instance, when I took over as a CEO in 2009, leading up to 2010, we had to go back and really remap our strategy, look at our culture and say, which elements of our culture did we need to tweak a little bit, without changing the fundamental DNA of our culture. And we went about that process. And just preserving that culture has been one of the greatest things that has led to the success of First Rand, to date. And secondly, we always come across, things that we need to think of in terms of the strategy, the direction of the group. And one of the key things that we did was to make sure that the component parts, in other words, the franchises, as in FNB, RMB, West Bank, were working a lot more in collaboration, in coordination in terms of the strategies, including our international strategies that we're following. And that's been a great success. Starting new businesses, this leadership team that I'm part of now, started, for instance, our asset management company, Ashburton. We've started a life insurance company at FNB. We've started businesses in 6 countries, which include, Zambia, Tanzania, Ghana, Nigeria, India, as an example. And those businesses are the businesses that we typically start from the ground up. And we take a long-term view. It is very difficult. It's easier sometimes to go and buy a business. But, because culture is important to us, and we don't want to overpay. We want to protect shareholder value. Starting new businesses has been the way to go for us. I don't think there's a right and wrong here. That's just the approach that we've decided as a company, and it happens to work. Yes, it is more difficult in certain cases because, when you start a business, you go from buying your first pencil to recruiting the first person to building all the building blocks to establish a business is not necessarily a very easy thing to do. But it's been a very fulfilling and a very successful strategy. The question of what the role of companies generally in country has been a key question that is being asked a lot more often, especially after the global financial crisis or the global economic crisis that started in 2008, 2009. Fortunately for us as South Africans, we've had this discussion of the role of business for much longer, since 1994, during the days of early days of our democracy. And the role of business, I believe, cannot be just to make profits, generate profits and pay dividends to our shareholders and grow shareholder value. The role of business in society extends to a much broader mandate, which is, it is important to make money, it is important to make profits, but at the same time, we have a role to play in our society, especially in developing countries such as South Africa or even the rest of Africa, where, yes, governments have roles to play, but if we worked in partnership with governments and civil society, we can achieve a lot more in solving the problems that we face, as a country or as a continent and so on. So that's why, for instance, having companies participate in solving the problems in education, in health, in water, in environmental sustainability are all important things and roles that business must play, because we cannot assure that we are going to be sustainable as businesses if we don't play our role in even creating an environment where economies grow and therefore can create more jobs, we can deal with unemployment, which in the long term will benefit our shareholders as well. So we have an absolute important role to play in that regard. Business leadership South Africa represents about 85 of the largest companies in South Africa, and it plays a very important role. One, in dealing with issues that affect business. In other words, those issues that we need to address as a country if we're going to treble the rate of growth of our economy, as an example, that range from the legislative environment that we have, and therefore agitating for the creation of a conducive environment in which to do business, to dealing with, for instance, issues that we confront today around power, as an example. How do we work with Eskom or with government in dealing with the power generation issues that we face, to looking at a whole raft of things like, for instance, the role that business can play as a social partner, for instance, in improving the quality of education in the country. This is one of the key issues which I'm particularly passionate and involved in. And business has a very important role to play in that regard, and BLSA does play a very important role. But there are other areas. For instance, if you look at the regulatory environment, in which you operate, how do we make sure that we improve that? But more importantly, we know that the relationship between the private sector and labor in this country needs to be improved, and therefore BLSA, as a business formation, engages with labor and different labor formations in terms, how do we make sure that we have a lot more, collaborative, environment between business and labor. Yes, of course, between employers and employees, there are always going to be issues and sometimes differences and so on. But in the interest of the country, there are a lot of things that we need to be doing together. So, BLSA plays a huge role in dealing with those issues, representing business as a collective in its dealings with government as well as civil society and formations like labor. When you look at the National Development Plan document, which identifies all the key binding constraints or the challenges that we face as a country, it absolutely spells all the key issues that we need to address as a country. So they range from education to health, to how we build an environment where business can thrive, where we can grow our economy and deal with issues such as unemployment, poverty, and joblessness. So it identifies all the key issues, and I'm quite pleased when I see some of the areas of the NDP that are being implemented. Education is one of those. So we've created the National Education Collaboration Trust. It brings all the critical stakeholders around the table in working with government to improve the quality of education in the country. as defined and determined by the National Development Plan. And that's already being implemented. So business is involved, and we are now working with government. We're in 4,365 schools in the country. It represents almost 20% of our total public education system. And we're training teachers. We're involved in supporting government programs in education, improving curriculum coverage, and so on, developing learning and teaching material. Because if we can address the education challenges that we face and the skills challenges that we face in the country, the issues that we face in the country and the challenges that we face, can actually be dealt with. One of the key issues when it comes to business that we haven't fully addressed, and we understand and agree it's going to be a journey that's going to take a while, is around the issue of transformation. Because I think if you look at the demographics of people that are coming out of universities, those demographics have not yet translated to how the demographics of the private sector actually look like, especially in the senior and top management positions. So there's still a number of issues that business has to address when it comes to transformation. And this includes, First Rand, in which I'm the CEO. We have a number of areas, for instance, when it comes to African women in the top and senior management positions, where we are not where we want to be. So there's still an amount of work that needs to be done in that regard. So I think business and business leaders need to embrace and understand the transformation imperative a lot more, because if we take a long-term view and a highly committed approach to transformation, we are going to see the fruits of that in terms of how it's going to benefit our businesses, because we will be able to listen and address a much larger market than what we're addressing at the moment. My wife and I are very busy people. She's a businesswoman, professional woman. I'm also quite busy and so on. Life is about choices and what is really important to us. And what's important to me and my wife may not necessarily be important and critical to the next person. But we have to make those choices ourselves. As an example, given just the amount of time that both of us spend working, typically both of us have a typical 14, 15-hour working day, including some weekends, especially on Sundays. We try and not do any work on Saturdays. But that essentially means there are certain things that we're not going to pay attention to. For instance, we don't have much time to spend with our friends. Other people may attach a lot more importance to spending time with friends. It is a choice that only we can make for ourselves. I don't think anybody else can make those choices for us. So when you talk about balance, I think it's important to look at the context of that balance. The context of balance has to align to what your priorities as a person are. And then you balance according to what those priorities are, but I don't think it's going to be possible to balance everything. In other words, to balance your social life, your family life, your work life. If all these things are equally important to you, I think it's really difficult to actually do that. If, for instance, you're a person who's fine with, for instance, just having your day job, and you're not really that ambitious because it's important for you to have a quality social life, that is fine as well. That's what you want, and that's the selection and the choice that you make for yourself. If I had to look at my life today and say, would I change anything? There's absolutely nothing that I would change, because, my life has sort of worked out the way that it has. I wouldn't change it for anything. I've been very fortunate and, in fact, very blessed to have the kind of privileges that I have, to have moved from being employed as a young professional to starting a business. It has become, even without my involvement at all, one of the largest businesses in the country. It's the fifth largest audit firms in the country, Sizwe Nxasana. I was very fortunate to, find an opportunity at Telecom, to have been part of that team, to have led that team. I'm fortunate right now to have spent time, at First Rand. So I wouldn't change that for anything. I wouldn't change even, of course, it's regrettable that Judy and I lost our son, who was 27 years old. It's a very painful process, because it's not often that we as parents want to bury our children. It's one of the most difficult things I've had to face, that we as a family have had to face. Yeah, but you learn to deal with it, and you use it as a basis of how you can help other children. So that's why, for instance, we created a Sizwe Nxasana foundation to help children. So we made a contribution, as an example, to children hospitals, including the Nelson Mandela Children's Hospital, so that we can hopefully avoid other parents going through the same things that we may have gone through. We're quite involved as a family in education. So we have a passion in education because we believe that if we are going to improve our continent, we need to give our children the abilities to solve problems, the cognitive skills which they need, but the best education which you can provide. And that's one of the things that we are really passionate about.